Under the blazing light of that unforgettable July 16th, a tide of expectation and reverence swept the faithful who gathered in anticipation of Pope Leo's revelation. Word had spread quickly. Here was not only a day sacred to Our Lady of Mount Carmel, but a rare occasion when the successor of Peter would break centuries of silence to disclose the ancient formula for miracles and protection through her intercession. Those who arrived in Rome early that morning whispered eagerly among themselves, weighed down with burdens of illness, financial need, broken families, and private despair, all holding hope that something extraordinary awaited them. The air thrummed with prayers as Pope Leo stepped onto the balcony overlooking St. Peter's Square, his presence commanding and gentle in equal measure. But what most transfixed those listening was the urgency in his eyes, a conviction rooted not in ceremony, but in a personal encounter with the Mother of God herself. Without preamble, Pope Leo recounted an event that had changed his own life, an evening of anguish and uncertainty in which he too had sought the outstretched mantle of the Virgin of Carmel, desperate for a sign. It was in that hour, he confessed, that he was guided to a practice, ancient as the Church itself, too often neglected, and yet thrumming with supernatural power for those with the humility to embrace it. He called on the faithful to retrieve their scapulars, the small squares of brown cloth, simple and unadorned, but stitched with centuries of promise. This is not simply a symbol, Pope Leo declared, his voice echoing above the square. It is a sure shield bestowed upon us by the Virgin herself. He reminded everyone that the scapular was not a talisman, not magic, but a signal of true interior conversion and filial trust. Miracles, he explained, blossom first in the soul prepared by humility and obedience, and the scapular is a daily reminder to remain in that state. He paused, watching as men, women, and children reached instinctively for the scapulars about their necks, or searched pockets and prayer books for the brown ribbon entrusted to so many Christian families. The effect was electric. Then, with measured clarity, Pope Leo detailed the 3 steps by which every soul, regardless of station or past, could dispose itself to receive the full measure of Our Lady of Mount Carmel's protection and miracles. First, he instructed one must renew their consecration to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, acknowledging her as both Mother and Queen, and entrusting every joy and sorrow to her care. Next, he called for a concrete act of charity on July 16th itself, feeding the hungry, visiting the lonely, forgiving an old wound, so that the outward gesture would reflect the inward conversion. Finally, he revealed the short prayer Our Lady had whispered to him in the silence of his troubled night, a prayer to be repeated 3 times, at sunrise and sundown. O Virgin of Mount Carmel, cover me with your mantle. Obtain for me the miracle I so desperately need, if it be the will of your Son. At this, a hush fell. Devotion rippled outward, and pilgrims knelt on cobblestones, hot from the Roman sun, some weeping, some lifting their scapulars heavenward, as if ready to be clothed anew with faith. Pope Leo gazed upon the crowd, conscious that this moment transcended words. He reminded them that Our Lady of Mount Carmel's miracles often come hidden, restoring hope, mending relationships, granting courage, or in sudden, unforeseen graces that transform the fabric of a life. He made one final plea: do not neglect confession and the Eucharist, the gifts that heal and sanctify the soul. Without them, he warned gently, all devotion is empty habit, and miracles, though possible, cannot take root amid indifference or deliberate sin. He assured the people that those who persevere, no matter how small their faith, will not be abandoned by the Mother who stood at Calvary and now reigns in glory. The embrace of hope deepened in the square, as Pope Leo continued to address the faithful. The scene was suffused with quiet awe, every word landing with the gravity of centuries and the warmth of a father's care. He reminded all present that seeking miracles was not reserved for saints, but was the right of every child of Mary who approached her with humility and sincerity of heart. He told a story drawn from the annals of the Church. An elderly widow in a distant village, who, weighed down by sorrow, had clung to her scapular and the simple prayer he had taught. With steadfast faith, she performed an act of kindness each July 16th, no matter how small. Over years, she witnessed not only unexpected healing within her family, but a quiet transformation of her own soul. Where once she felt despair, she now found a resilient peace, and where bitterness had grown, forgiveness bloomed. Pope Leo explained that these hidden miracles are often greater than any visible sign, since they touch eternity and ripple into the world through love. Pope Leo then addressed the young, urging them not to delay devotion until life throws its hardest trials. The heart formed early in Marian trust, he said, becomes strong enough to weather all storms. He described how generations before them had built their lives on this foundation, and invited everyone to consider the scapular not as an old relic, but as a living promise renewed with each sunrise. Pausing, he surveyed the gathering, sensing questions unsaid. Would God really answer such simple faith? Were miracles still possible in an age so skeptical? The Pope assured them that heaven's generosity is never exhausted, and that Our Lady's intercession is as real and powerful as in the earliest days of the Church. He pointed to testimonies collected during his pontificate, accounts of reconciliation, conversion, and even physical healings, always attributed to childlike trust and obedience to the Virgin's guidance. As the sun climbed higher, Pope Leo urged confession, clear conscience, and reception of the Eucharist as the essential groundwork for receiving God's gifts. He offered to personally bless the scapulars held high in the square that day, extending his hands in a gesture that seemed to enfold the throng in a mantle of prayer. Chants rose anew, guided by choirs stationed at the basilica's edge, weaving the faithful into a tapestry of devotion that felt unbreakable. Finally, with the compassion of a shepherd and the authority of a spiritual father, Pope Leo concluded, "Go forth clothed with faith, renewed in charity, confident in the Mother who leads us ever closer to her Son. Repeat her name, often live her virtues daily, and your lives will bear the marks of miracles seen and unseen, until we gather again beneath her gentle gaze." He stepped back, and the congregation slowly dispersed. Hearts stirred, scapulars clutched each person, bearing away the certainty that the path to miracles and protection was now open to all as close as the next act of faith. A sense of expectancy lingered long after the Pope's words faded into the summer air. In homes and parishes across the city and beyond, families repeated the prayer at sunrise and sundown as instructed. Some found comfort, immediately sensing a gentle reassurance that their petitions reached the heart of the Virgin. For others, the practice required patience, an act of perseverance, rather than a catalyst of instant results. As reports filtered back to the Vatican, patterns began to form. Letters described sudden reconciliations between old friends, unexpected recoveries, and a newfound peace, even among those whose material situations did not quickly change. Priests offered testimony of increased confessions, their churches filled with penitents, inspired by the Pope's exhortation to cleanse the soul before the great feast. Children learning the simple prayer for the first time brought it home to parents whose faith had grown weary. Communities that once had grown fractured over bitterness or old grievances paused on July 16th to offer gestures of charity inspired by the challenge to make love visible. the Pope's teaching had subtly shifted. The atmosphere miracles people began to realize could be as humble as a softened heart or a solitary act of forgiveness. Spiritual directors noted that many who took up the scapular with sincere intention experienced a renewal of devotion, drawing them closer to the sacraments and to each other. Each evening, the faithful gathered in procession scapulars, visible voices united as they recited the prayer. The city's rhythm changed, at least for that summer, as a wave of Marian trust pulsed outward, touching those near and far. Even the skeptical found themselves moved by the serenity of their neighbors, and gradually the boundaries between doubt and belief softened. Pope Leo, reflecting on these fruits, urged the bishops to encourage the practice in every diocese, reminding them that the Virgin of Mount Carmel's promise knew no borders, and her intercession was not restricted to a single day or place. The simplicity of the devotion, he noted, made it accessible to rich and poor, learned and simple alike, every heart capable of embracing its core trust, charity, and humble prayer. Before the next feast day approached, stories of the previous July 16th continued circulating testimonies of lives quietly changed, burdens eased, and faith reborn, not just in individual souls, but within the Church herself. As the months passed, the scapular became not a mere object, but a living sign of a renewed relationship with Mary, Mother Advocate, and sure refuge for all who seek miracles, both seen and unseen. In the weeks that followed, the seed of devotion planted on July 16th began to flourish in unexpected ways. Seasoned believers and newcomers alike found themselves drawn to the gentle practices encouraged by Pope Leo, discovering that miracles were not distant or rare, but woven daily into the tapestry of ordinary life. Families who had once prayed out of duty now gathered with a new sense of anticipation at sunrise and sundown, reciting the prayer to Our Lady of Mount Carmel. Children led their parents in simple acts of charity, delivering food to the elderly neighbor, writing letters of encouragement to those struggling, reconciling after arguments. Each small action took on greater meaning, inspired by the Pope's promise that even such humble offerings could become channels of grace. Parishes marked the passage of time with nightly processions, the flicker of candlelight illuminating faces both young and old. The scapular, once a forgotten sacramental, tucked away, became a visible sign of belonging, a badge of hope in a culture yearning for renewal. Pope Leo's instructions were repeated in sermons and newsletters. Renew your trust. Give what love you can, repeat the prayer with sincerity, and stay close to the sacraments. In distant corners of the world, stories began to surface, accounts of conversions among those who had drifted from faith, reports of long-standing illnesses lifted broken families, making a fresh start. Bishops confirmed that confessions increased, and masses on Marian feast days were filled to overflowing. The transformation the Pope reflected in private was not just in miraculous outcomes, but in the rise of resilient, compassionate communities, parishes alive with the spirit of Mount Carmel. Letters of thanksgiving arrived in Rome by the hundreds, many accompanied by drawings or tokens from grateful pilgrims. An orphaned boy healed of a chronic ailment, a mother reunited with her estranged daughter, a young priest discovering his vocation, renewed, all attributed to the act of trust, charity, and the daily invocation of Mary's protection, as described by the pontiff. With each passing month, the Church found herself growing, not by great signs alone, but by gentle accumulative proofs of grace, patience among the impatient, hope in the hopeless, reconciliation in the hardened of heart. Pope Leo gently reminded his flock that miracles granted through Our Lady's intercession were as much about the healing of souls as about physical changes. True protection, he emphasized, meant being drawn into deeper intimacy with Christ through Mary, shielded from despair, guided through confusion, led unerringly toward light and peace. As the next July 16th approached, anticipation grew, but so did understanding. The faithful realized that the miracle of that summer was in many ways the rediscovery of a living, loving relationship with heaven, a tenderness extending from Mary's mantle, reached by the hands of a pope, and now embraced by people of every tongue and nation. The pathway to miracles, as revealed by Pope Leo, had become a pilgrimage of the heart, one that would continue resonating through generations. As July 16th dawned once more, a profound anticipation radiated through every church home and heart touched by Pope Leo's message the previous year. News of the transformation, both public and deeply personal, had reached even those who once doubted that such simple faith could yield real change. This day, the Pope issued a final exhortation, gathered and broadcast in every language to every corner of the church. The promise of Our Lady of Mount Carmel was for all times, not only for one hallowed feast. He encouraged the faithful to begin the day with the prayer, not as a mere recitation, but as a living dialogue with the Mother, who intercedes with tenderness and power. He asked all to look back on the past year, not searching for only spectacular miracles, but becoming attentive to the quiet ways grace had moved a habit, shed a wound forgiven a friendship, restored a night endured in peace. Pope Leo underscored that these sustained transformations were the true protection. Every soul most needed a heart aligned with God's will, open to the Virgin's guidance. Throughout parishes, the sense of community built around the scapular devotion grew only stronger. New acts of charity were quietly planned, and executed funds raised for the poor, reconciliations brokered, and youth invited to deepen their commitment, even in places where trials persisted and prayers seemed to go unanswered. An unshakable hope remained. Pope Leo reminded all that persistence in trust, especially when results are hidden or delayed, is itself a miracle of grace, a sign of faith's triumph over discouragement. Near sunset, Pope Leo spoke once more, his voice reaching across the crowds and into the solitude of countless homes. As children of Mary, never despair. Let your lives marked by the scapular and lived in daily charity and trust proclaim that miracles are not the exception, but the expectation of a life surrendered to God through His Mother. The miracle you seek may not always come as you imagine, but no humble act, no persevering prayer is ever lost. With Mary, all things are made new. By nightfall, the city's lights glimmered, gently mirrored in the gratitude and faith of those who had embraced this path. The practice of daily prayer, acts of charity, and renewed devotion to the sacraments had left an indelible mark, a living legacy of miracles great and small, through the enduring power of the Virgin's mantle. Pope Leo's revelation was no longer a secret, but a shared inheritance, offering protection, renewal, and the horizon of hope that would carry the Church and each soul onward beneath the gaze of Our Lady of Mount Carmel. The faithful understood at last the path to miracles, and protection begins and ends with trust, charity, and a heart turned toward Mary the Mother, who never abandons her children.